Hello, class. Mr. Fino here. This is lesson or unit 2, lesson 2 on ancient Sumer. Here we have some Sumerian art. Looks like a battle of some kind. So, in this section, you will learn why historians classify ancient Sumer as a civilization. And there's going to be some specific classifications, um, a number of things. They'll kind of like a checklist of why we consider it a civilization. But we'll get back to these images and talk about what they represent. All right, so those 7 characteristics that I was mentioning of a civilization, what make up a civilization are that it has a stable food supply, like this picture of the crops, a social structure with different levels and jobs, which is kind of like this picture on the bottom left of different groups of people doing different things, a system of government, which is kind of like the center picture on the bottom, a religious system with a set of beliefs and forms of worship. So the bottom right picture has some of the symbols of different faiths and religions like Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Buddhism. Um, a highly developed way of life with different forms of art. So art, um, a highly developed, advances in technology like the wheel, and a highly developed written language, kind of like this clay tablet with the symbols, which we're going to see is cuneiform. All right, so the first question is, how did the Sumerians maintain a stable food supply? How did they get enough food that was stable, meaning it was consistent, it was always coming in, they didn't need to worry about it? So they developed a complex irrigation system with canals, dams, and reservoirs. So canals are kind of like man-made streams. Dams and reservoirs are places they could store water for future use. They invented the plow, which allowed them to till the soil for planting. So this on the right is a plow. It looks a little more advanced, but something like this. Um, because before the plow, farmers they would just poke holes in the ground with animal horns or sticks themselves, and um, that took a lot of time, right? So um, the plow could be pulled by animals like oxen. It just made everything easier for them. And then on the left here, you have a picture of a canal, um, a dam, and a reservoir. All right, so now who were the different groups living in Sumer? Because a civilization needs to have a sort of social structure. So at the highest level were priests, kings, nobles, and government officials who all lived in large 2-story homes in the center of town. So because religion and spirituality was an important part of Sumerian life, priests would have been at the top with kings, nobles, and other people working in the government. The middle level was made up of merchants, artisans, farmers, and fishers. So people that sold stuff, people that made stuff. Um, and then farmers and fishers would probably be at the bottom of that middle. But one group of artisans were metalworkers who created things like swords, arrows, arrowheads, plows, hoes, mirrors, and jewelry. So created a lot of things that they would have used for different purposes. And at the bottom level were slaves who were often enemies captured during war. So here we have a triangle showing showing the different groups and where they stood with some symbols to represent the stuff. All right, so a civilization has a form of government. So how did kings rule Sumerian city-states? Sumerians believed that kings had the support of their gods. Sumerian kings enforced laws, collected taxes, built temples, and maintained the irrigation systems. All right, so they believe these kings were chosen by the gods, and the kings were important for the laws and collecting money for the government to use to build stuff and maintain stuff. Sumerian kings led their city-states army, so they were, the head of the army, which consisted of both professional soldiers and temporary citizen soldiers. and there were foot soldiers and others that used chariots in the army. Sumerian kings also appointed governors and scribes to help them. Scribes are writers, right? This picture on the left shows how taxes work. Everyone giving the money to the king, and then he would use that money to run the civilization. And then on the right, we have a chariot, which would have been in the army. So a civilization has religion, some sort of organized religion. So what did religious life look like in Sumerian city-states? Sumerians wanted to please their gods in every way, from growing crops to settling disputes. They built temples and massive religious towers called ziggurats, which is this picture on the top left, which are made of mud bricks and could be as high as 7 stories tall, so pretty tall for an early civilization. And they believed the gods lived in special shrines at the very top. And then lastly, Sumerians held religious ceremonies with music and sometimes even human sacrifice. So this picture on the bottom left kind of shows human sacrifice. Art and culture. So a civilization will have, art and culture in it. So what did art and culture look like in Sumerian city-states? Some of the artists in Sumer were metalworkers, architects, and sculptors. Architects build buildings. Metalworkers obviously work with metal. Sculptors will sculpt statues. And then musicians brought joy to people and the gods. They would have performed at temple ceremonies or love songs at feasts. And they played instruments like the drums, pipes, and the lyre, which kind of like a harp, which could be ornately decorated. So technology is an important part of civilization. So what were some of the technological advances in Sumer? So probably the most important technological advancement in Sumer was the wheel. That's a huge development. So it was initially used by pottery makers. They eventually used the wheel used to create wheeled carts for farmers and chariots for the army. So you can see here the wheels would look like. Because before the wheel, people had to drag their goods on sledges, like on the bottom left here. They would have dragged it on that. But then when you have a wheeled cart, it just makes things easier. And then the arch was another technological advancement that added strength and beauty to Sumerian buildings. So you can see that on the top right. Different types of arches, which provide for doorways. A civilization has some sort of written language. So what was that in Sumer? They created a written language called cuneiform, which comes from the Latin word for wedge, which used a wedge-shaped stylus to etch writing on clay tablets, like here on the bottom left. Cuneiform was used to record information about the goods people exchange. So it's a big way it was used is just in trade, right? To say like, oh, I traded 15 goats for this much crops or whatever. And they may have contained as many as 2,000 symbols to stand for sounds, words, and phrases. So a little bit of a mixture. And the bottom right, this is what the styluses would have looked like. They would have carved into the clay. So in summary, in this lesson, we learned about ancient Sumer, a civilization in Mesopotamia. And so it had religion, it had written language, stable food supply, technology like the wheel, a certain social structure, government, and art, right? So thank you.